Alright YouTube, so we are back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today we were going to do a different video about Genova, but I seen this article from Screen Rant, and I kind of had to talk about it. Now before we even hop into it, this is going to be a polarizing discussion. Obviously people are going to disagree with things that I say, and that's perfectly fine, but I've always voiced my opinion here on this channel, and I want to do it here, especially with FF7 Remake, something I'm, a lifelong fan of, right? Something I'm very passionate about. Anyways, this Screen Rant article is about how Remake Part 2 needs to, not should, it has to have it. It's the most important aspect of the entire game at all. Needs to have LGBTQ representation. Despite us already kind of having that when it comes to Remake, and of course the original game with the wall market stuff, there's definitely like bisexual or gay dudes within the like Honeybee Inn and stuff. But even in Remake, Andrea Rodea is clearly, at the very least, a bisexual guy, or maybe even a full-on gay guy. I don't know what the canon of that would be. And you could argue that maybe like Jules within Walmart, within the gym, like he comes off as, at least a bisexual guy, or maybe even gay as well. And despite Rude being very much into Tifa when it comes to the original Final Fantasy VII, they kind of tease a little bit of like bromance or something with him and Reno when it comes to Remake. Like whenever you put Rude to sleep, like he mumbles Reno's name right before he wakes up, which I guess implies that he was dreaming about Reno.
Reno.
And by no means am I saying that means that Reno and Rude are together or in a relationship, but you could interpret it that way, right? It's open to interpretation, and that's part of what this article is asking for. They want it to be left up to the audience to kind of decide for themselves who they think is interested in each other, and you could do that with Remake, with Reno and Rude, despite us knowing that Rude is supposed to be into Tifa based on the original game. Based on dialogue and, of course, the infamous programming they put into FF7 where Rude doesn't really attack Tifa unless she's like the last character alive on your team. Romance tends to be a part of many RPG games and has become more prominent in recent years. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is no exception. While the original Final Fantasy VII game had very little in the way of romantic subplots, FF7 Remake integrated a much more involved love triangle between Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa. This unneeded addition, however, continues a trend of lacking romantic diversity in the Final Fantasy series as a whole, which has shown no inclusion of LGBT main characters to date. So first up, the reason I put emphasis on the word unneeded when I said unneeded addition was because the love triangle between Tifa, Aerith, and Cloud is something that was in the original game. It's something that's been talked about for 20 plus years now, so it's not surprising that there was more emphasis put on that when it came to Remake. Like, why wouldn't they lean into that more? A better example they could have used would be like Jessie being super into Cloud, because that did not exist in the original game. That was a brand new addition to Remake, another straight hetero relationship. Like, that's a better example than the obvious prominent relationship from the original game. Now, when they talk about the lack of LGBT main characters, I'm assuming they mean the main party that you control, and I cannot vouch for the entire franchise, but nothing comes to mind. Like, I can't think of an LGBT main character that we control and use throughout the Final Fantasy games. There might be, but I can't think of any, so they're kind of corrected there. When it comes to FF7, pretty much all of the main characters are spoken for, except for maybe Yuffie. I don't know what her relationship status would be. And Kate Sith / Reeve, like I don't know what his thing is. I don't know if he's straight, gay, got a girlfriend or wife or whatever. And what I mean by spoken for is obviously we have Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and also I guess technically Zack. Barrett used to have a wife. We know that Vincent's into Lucretia. We know that Cid gets with Shara after FF7. We know that Red 13 had a female of his species with Before Crisis. So unless they want to retcon a lot of the main characters, which I think would upset more people than it would please, or dive into the sexuality of Yuffie and Reeve, which to the best of my knowledge is undecided anyways, fine, who cares? The original Final Fantasy VII left much to the imagination as far as character relationships go. Interactions between characters weren't expressed as explicitly romantic, and this ambiguity allowed fans of Final Fantasy VII to either ship more mainstream couples like Cloud and Tifa, or they could look into relationships that were more relatable to their own personal lives, like Vincent and Cid. Yeah, you read that correctly. You heard that correctly, whatever. By erasing this in FF7 Remake and pushing the love triangle, the game has disposed of the more delicate approach of letting the player connect the dots in their own way, no longer allowing them to decide for themselves which characters might have a personal interest in each other. So I wanted to read that part because apparently people out there ship Vincent and Cid, which is something I was not aware about until right this second, at least according to Screen Rant. And somehow people relate to that relationship, which I don't know how you relate to an old man who's bitter and hates the world and the undead guy who can turn into a monster that can destroy the planet, because I don't relate to that at all. And again, the love triangle existed in the original game, so it's still stupid to complain about that. By adding LGBTQA+ characters and representation to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, the game would be up to date with the diversity that is being seen in other games. This would also allow a wider audience the ability to connect to content in the FF7 Remake outside of heteronormative romance subplots, and in the idea that all characters are perceived as straight in the series. If adding more concrete romantic storylines is how the developers want to go, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 should cement other romantic storylines that include their wider audience, allowing fans of the original to continue to find themselves in the characters that they have come to love over decades of gameplay. I find it pretty stupid that they say that the remake devs need to do this because other developers are doing it, because other games are doing it. That's not organic, that's not real, that is forced. Doing it for the sake of doing it. Not because they want to, because they have to, they need to. Stupid. And again, I'm not sure if they're asking for the developers to like retcon the sexuality of the main characters, or I guess maybe they could lean into, again, Yuffie and Reeve or whatever, which nobody wants that. Nobody wants them to change the main characters. Now, if they wanted to kind of lean into, or maybe even directly show that Reno and Rude, for example, are into each other, I don't think anybody would care or complain, because there's already kind of that there anyways. What the people who complain about this stuff fail to realize is that nobody cares, in like a positive way, about LGBT representation in video games. Like, people are completely fine with it. Nobody cares that there's gay characters in video games. It's when it's forced and done for the brownie points, for the social media points. So people will be like, oh my god, Remake Part 2 has two guys kissing. Can you believe it? Buy the game right now. Like, that's the issue there, is when it's forced. When it's done because they're being told to do it. Because other games do it. Because other developers do it. Like, nobody wants that, dude. As somebody pointed out on Twitter, FF7R is not really the game to do that with, since it's a remake of an already established game with already established characters with already established relationships. But when it comes to future Final Fantasy titles, like Final Fantasy 16, for example, we don't know those characters, right? Like, maybe Clive is gay. Maybe Joshua is gay. Maybe that other chick, I can't remember her name right now, she could be gay too, or something like that, right? We don't know. And everybody would be fine with it. Like, if I'm traveling the world of Gaia with Remake Part 2 and I go into, I don't know, Junon, and there's two guys holding hands, I'm not going to be like, grrr, rage, uninstall. Nobody's going to care, because whatever. Who gives a shit? But if you want to retcon that this whole time Barrett's actually been gay and his dead wife, that's a cover-up. You know? It's a cover-up. He's been gay this whole time. Like, that's going to fucking piss people off. But I find it very stupid and hypocritical to complain about a very prominent heterosexual love triangle from the original game being a subplot in Remake, and they don't want that in the game, but also let's force in a homosexual or LGBTQA+ subplot because I don't feel represented. That's just stupid to me. I tried to not come across as an asshole when it comes to this subject with this video. I've been very opinionated on things like this in the past on the channel. All my videos are still there. I've never deleted a video myself. So I apologize if I came across as an asshole within this video. And in fact, I'm all for the representation, again, if it's done organically. And they kind of built towards that a little bit, again, using the Reno and Rude example. And if it comes out within Part 2 that Reno and Rude are a thing, we're all for it. Who cares, bro? In fact, I ship it. Let's do it. In fact, I want that to happen. Show me that shit. I'm all for the bromance being a romance. Let's see it. So I get that this is a touchy subject, but I like to give my opinion on stuff that people are talking about, and this is something people are talking about on social media because of this article. So what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the LGBTQA+, I believe I said that right, representation within Remake Part 2 and beyond? Are you for it? Who do you ship? Like, what would make sense, right? Organically, again, because that's what's important. You don't want it forced or faked. Who do you think makes the most sense when it comes to that? Like, in terms of the main characters, I guess? Or maybe even like the side prominent main characters? Like, you know, the Turks and stuff? Either way, my dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys already want to save more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid. I'm on Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.